The evening shift at the cafe was slow. Only 3 customers sat at the tables, typing on their laptops and sipping their drinks. The young server stood behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with a clean cloth. The smell of fresh coffee filled the small shop. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The television mounted in the corner of the cafe was on. It usually played news or cooking shows. Today it showed something different. NASA was having a press conference. Several people in suits sat at a long table with microphones in front of them. Behind them, a large screen displayed charts and diagrams about space. The server glanced at the TV while cleaning. They had always loved space. As a child, they spent hours reading books about planets, stars, and rockets. Their bedroom walls were covered with posters of astronauts and space shuttles. They knew the names of all the planets and could draw the solar system from memory. In high school, they stayed up late watching documentaries about Mars missions and black holes. But life took a different path. College was expensive. Their family needed help paying bills, so after finishing community college with basic courses, they took a job at the cafe. It paid enough to help at home and cover rent for the small apartment they shared with 2 friends. The dream of working in space science seemed far away now. Still, they never stopped reading about space in their free time. On the TV, a NASA engineer was talking about a new mission to Mars. The spacecraft would launch in a few weeks. It would carry equipment to study the red planet's surface and atmosphere. The engineer explained how the rocket would travel through space, using gravity from other planets to speed up and save fuel. This was called a gravitational assist. The server stopped cleaning and looked more carefully at the screen. A diagram showed the spacecraft's path from Earth to Mars. Lines curved around planets showing how the spacecraft would move. Numbers and equations filled the sides of the diagram. Most people watching probably couldn't understand what the numbers meant, but the server could. Years of reading and self-study had taught them about orbital mechanics and space physics. Something looked wrong. The server squinted at the screen, trying to see the numbers more clearly. One equation in particular caught their eye. It showed the calculation for the gravitational assist around Venus. The spacecraft would swing past Venus to gain speed for the journey to Mars. But the numbers in the equation didn't match what they should be. The server felt their heart beat faster. They must be wrong. This was NASA. The smartest scientists and engineers in the world worked there. They had computers and years of training. How could a cafe server spot a mistake that they had missed? It didn't make sense. Maybe the TV image was just unclear. Maybe they were reading the numbers wrong. A customer called out, asking for a refill of coffee. The server walked over with the pot and poured more coffee into the cup. They smiled and nodded, but their mind was still on that diagram. Back behind the counter, they pulled out their phone and tried to find a better image of the NASA presentation online. Several news websites had photos from the press conference. They zoomed in on one photo showing the trajectory diagram. There it was. The same equation, the same numbers, and the same mistake. The calculation for Venus's gravitational pull was off. Not by much, but in space, even small errors could have big consequences. If this error was real, the spacecraft might miss Mars completely. It could fly past the planet and drift into deep space. Years of work and millions of dollars would be lost. The server's hands felt cold. They put down their phone and took a deep breath. Maybe they should just forget about it. What were the chances they were right and NASA was wrong? Almost zero. They would probably look foolish if they said anything. People might laugh at a cafe worker trying to correct rocket scientists. But what if they were right? What if there really was a mistake? The mission would fail. All those scientists who worked so hard would be heartbroken. The equipment that took years to build would be lost in space. And the server would know they could have prevented it but stayed silent because they were afraid of looking stupid. The rest of the shift passed slowly. The server made drinks, cleaned tables, and counted the money in the register. But their thoughts kept returning to that equation. When closing time came, they locked the door and walked home through the quiet streets. The night air was cool. Stars were visible above, small points of light in the dark sky. One of those lights was Mars. In a few weeks, a spacecraft was supposed to go there. If the trajectory was wrong, it never would arrive. At home, the apartment was quiet. Their roommates were already asleep. The server went to their small bedroom and turned on the desk lamp. They pulled out old notebooks from a drawer under the bed. These notebooks were filled with pages of calculations, drawings of orbits, and notes about physics. They had filled these notebooks over years of studying space science on their own. For the next 3 hours, the server worked through the math. They used a calculator and filled several pages with numbers and equations. They drew diagrams showing how Venus's gravity would affect the spacecraft. They checked and rechecked their work looking for any mistakes. By 2 in the morning, they were certain. The NASA diagram contained an error. The gravitational assist calculation was wrong. If the spacecraft launched with this trajectory, it would miss Mars by thousands of kilometers. The server sat back in their chair and rubbed their tired eyes. Now they faced a choice. They could forget about this and go to sleep. Go back to work tomorrow and let NASA handle their own business. Or they could speak up. They could try to tell someone at NASA about the mistake, even though it seemed crazy. Even though no one might listen to a Café server with no degree in aerospace engineering. Sleep did not come easily that night. The server lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about spacecraft and trajectories and the courage it would take to send an email to NASA. Morning came too quickly. The alarm clock buzzed at 6:30. The server opened their eyes and felt exhausted. Only 3 hours of sleep. Their mind had been racing all night, thinking about the NASA mission and the mistake they had found. Now in the morning light, the whole thing seemed even more impossible. Who were they to question NASA? They got ready for work slowly, moving like they were underwater. In the bathroom mirror, they saw dark circles under their eyes. Their roommate was making breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of toast filled the apartment. The server grabbed a banana and their backpack and headed out the door. The bus ride to the cafe took 20 minutes. They stared out the window, watching the city wake up. People walked dogs. Cars stopped at red lights. Everything was normal, but nothing felt normal. At the cafe, the morning rush started immediately. People wanted coffee before work. The line stretched to the door. The server made lattes, cappuccinos, and espressos. They smiled at customers and made small talk. But inside, their thoughts were somewhere else. During a brief quiet moment, they pulled out their phone and searched for NASA contact information. There were many different email addresses for different departments. Which one should they use? Who would even read an email from a stranger? The lunch shift was busy too. Sandwiches and salad, more coffee, more customers. The server's manager noticed they seemed distracted and asked if everything was okay. They said yes, just tired. The manager nodded and told them to take a break soon. During the break, the server sat in the back room and opened their laptop. They had brought it to work in their backpack. Their hands shook slightly as they opened a new email. Writing the email was harder than solving the math problem. How do you tell NASA they made a mistake without sounding crazy or rude? The server started typing, then deleted everything. Started again. Deleted again. After 30 minutes, they had written 3 sentences. This was impossible. Maybe they should just give up. But then they thought about the spacecraft. Months from now, it would reach the point where it should encounter Mars, but Mars wouldn't be there. The spacecraft would sail past empty space, its cameras and instruments useless. All that work for nothing. All because no one spoke up about an error. The server started typing again. This time, they didn't stop. They explained who they were. Just someone who loved space and studied it as a hobby. They apologized for bothering busy professionals. Then they described the mistake they had spotted in the trajectory diagram. They explained the math carefully, step by step. They attached photos of their handwritten calculations from last night. Pages and pages of numbers and equations. They added diagrams they had drawn showing the correct trajectory compared to the one NASA had shown. The email was long. Maybe too long. But the server wanted to show they weren't just guessing. They had done real work. Real calculations. They reread the email 5 times, fixing small mistakes and making the language clearer. Their break was over. They had to get back to work. But the email still sat there unsent. Their finger hovered over the send button. What would happen if they sent it? Probably nothing. NASA received thousands of emails every day. Most people would think this was just another message from someone who didn't understand science. It would be deleted or ignored. But there was a tiny chance someone might read it. Someone might check the math. Someone might realize the server was right. They pressed send. The email disappeared from the screen. The server closed their laptop and went back to the counter. Their hands were sweating. Their heart was pounding. They had done it. Whether anything would happen or not, At least they had tried. At least they had spoken up. The rest of the workday passed in a blur. The server made drinks automatically, their mind elsewhere. What if NASA did read the email? What if they got angry that someone questioned them? What if they thought the server was trying to embarrass them? Worse, what if the server was wrong after all? What if there was something they had missed in their calculations? They would look so foolish. A cafe worker trying to teach rocket scientists about space. After work, the server checked their email on their phone while walking to the bus stop. Nothing from NASA, of course not. It had only been a few hours. They probably wouldn't hear anything at all. At home, they checked again. Still nothing. They made dinner with their roommates. Pasta with tomato sauce. Simple and cheap. One roommate talked about their day at the store where they worked. Another complained about a difficult customer. The server nodded and listened but didn't mention the email to NASA. It seemed too strange to explain. That night, the server checked their email 20 times. Before bed. In the middle of the night when they couldn't sleep. First thing in the morning, nothing. The next day at work was the same. Make coffee. Serve customers. Check email, nothing. By the second day, the server started to feel relieved. No response meant they could forget about the whole thing. Life would go back to normal. Just work and bills and ordinary days. On the third day, the server almost didn't check their email. What was the point? NASA wasn't going to respond. But during their afternoon break, they opened their phone out of habit. The inbox had one new message. The subject line made their breath stop. Mars mission trajectory concern. Urgent. The sender was someone at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The server's hands shook so much they almost dropped the phone. They clicked on the email. It was short. It asked if they could speak immediately. It included a phone number. The message had been sent 2 hours ago. 2 hours. The server looked at the time. It was 3 p.m. in California where they lived. The email had come from JPL, which was also in California. They could still call, but their shift wasn't over. There were customers waiting. The server looked around frantically. Their manager was making a sandwich for someone. Another coworker was at the register. Everyone was busy. How could they ask to leave early? How could they explain this? They walked up to their manager, trying to keep their voice steady. They said there was an emergency. A family emergency. They needed to make an important phone call right away. The manager looked concerned and said to go ahead. Take whatever time they needed. The server grabbed their backpack and rushed outside. The street was noisy with traffic. They walked quickly until they found a quiet spot behind the cafe near the dumpsters. Not the most glamorous place to call NASA, but it was quiet. They pulled out their phone and stared at the number in the email. Their finger hovered over it. This was real. NASA had actually responded. They were actually going to call. They pressed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. A woman's voice answered, professional and calm. She asked if this was the person who had sent the email about the Mars trajectory. The server said yes, their voice shaking. The woman said they needed to talk right away. Could they speak now? The server said yes, and just like that, everything in their life changed. The woman on the phone introduced herself. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen. She was a mission coordinator at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. Her voice was serious but not unfriendly. She asked the server to confirm their name and email address. The server answered, trying to keep their voice from shaking. Behind the cafe, a truck drove by, making noise. The server pressed the phone closer to their ear. Dr. Chen said that the email had been forwarded to her team early this morning. At first, they almost dismissed it. They received many messages from people who thought they had found problems with NASA missions. Usually these people meant well but didn't understand the complex science involved. However, something about this email was different. The calculations were detailed. The math was correct. The diagrams showed real understanding of orbital mechanics, so Dr. Chen had asked 3 engineers to review the work carefully. The server listened, barely breathing. Dr. Chen continued. The engineers had spent the morning going through every calculation in the email. They checked the photos of the handwritten work. They ran computer simulations. They compared everything to NASA's original trajectory plan, and they found something that made them very concerned. The server had been right about the error. There was a mistake in the gravitational assist calculation. A small error, but in space, small errors become big problems. The server felt dizzy. They leaned against the wall of the cafe for support. They had been right. NASA had made a mistake, and they had found it. A cafe server with no fancy degree had spotted something that professional scientists had missed. It didn't seem real. Dr. Chen was still talking. She asked if the server could explain exactly how they had found the error. What had made them look so carefully at that particular equation? The server took a deep breath and started explaining. They told Dr. Chen about watching the press conference on the cafe TV, about noticing the trajectory diagram, about going home and working through the math for hours. They admitted they had been terrified to send the email. They had thought no one would take them seriously. Their voice got stronger as they talked. This was something they knew, something they understood. For the first time in 3 days, they didn't feel scared. They felt confident. Dr. Chen asked technical questions. What was the server's background in physics? Had they studied aerospace engineering? The server explained honestly. No formal training in aerospace. Just community college classes in basic math and science. Everything else was self-taught. Books from the library, online courses, videos, articles, years of reading and studying alone in their bedroom because they loved space. There was a pause on the phone. The server worried they had said too much. Maybe NASA wouldn't trust someone without proper credentials. But Dr. Chen surprised them. She said that some of the best discoveries in science came from unexpected places. What mattered was whether the work was correct. And this work was absolutely correct. In fact, if this error had not been caught, the mission would likely have failed. The spacecraft would have missed Mars by approximately 3,000 kilometers. 3 years of preparation. $200 million. All wasted. Dr. Chen's voice became even more serious. She said the server had potentially saved the entire mission. The server felt tears in their eyes. They blinked them away quickly. Dr. Chen asked if they could join a video conference call with the mission team. Right now, today. The team needed to understand exactly how the error had occurred and how to fix it. The server looked at their watch. It was 3:30 in the afternoon. They were supposed to work until 6. But this was NASA. This was a Mars mission. They said yes. Yes, they could do the call. Dr. Chen said she would send a video conference link in 5 minutes. The server should find a quiet place with good internet connection. Did they have a laptop? Yes, the server said. It was in their backpack. They had brought it to work today. Dr. Chen said good. Be ready in 5 minutes. She would introduce them to the team. Then she hung up. The server stood behind the cafe holding their phone, trying to process what had just happened. 5 minutes. They needed a quiet place with internet. The cafe had Wi-Fi, but it was too noisy. Too many customers. Their apartment was 20 minutes away by bus. Too far, the server thought quickly. There was a public library 2 blocks from the cafe. It had study rooms. They started running. Their backpack bounced on their shoulders. People on the sidewalk stared as they rushed past. The server didn't care. They were about to have a video call with NASA. The library was nearly empty. The server asked the librarian if they could use a study room. The librarian said yes and showed them to a small room with a desk and chair. The server thanked her and closed the door. They pulled out their laptop and connected to the library Wi-Fi. Their email had a new message from Dr. Chen with a video conference link. The server clicked it. Their heart was pounding so hard they could hear it in their ears. The video screen loaded. Suddenly they were looking at 12 people. Scientists and engineers. Some sat in an office with computers behind them. Others were in what looked like a control room with large screens on the walls. Everyone looked at the server. The young person in a cafe uniform sitting in a library study room. The server felt very small, very out of place. But then Dr. Chen smiled from the screen. She introduced the server to everyone by name. She explained how they had found the error. Several people on the call nodded. One older man with gray hair said thank you for sending the email. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Dr. Chen shared her screen. The trajectory diagram appeared. The same one from the TV news conference. She asked the server to walk everyone through the mistake. The server took a deep breath. They forgot about their cafe uniform. They forgot about being nervous. They started talking about orbital mechanics and gravitational assist and velocity calculations. They explained where the error was. They showed why it mattered. They answered questions from the engineers, technical questions about math and physics, and the server knew the answers. All those years of studying alone were paying off now. The meeting lasted 2 hours. The team worked together to understand how the error had happened. It turned out that two different people had calculated the same part of the trajectory. They used slightly different methods. When combining their work, they had averaged the two results instead of recognizing that one method was more accurate. The error was small enough that it passed several reviews without anyone noticing, until a cafe server with sharp eyes and strong knowledge spotted it on a TV screen. By the end of the call, the team had a plan to fix the trajectory. They would need to recalculate several parts of the mission. The launch might be delayed by a week or two, but the mission would succeed. The spacecraft would reach Mars. Dr. Chen asked if the server would be willing to help with the recalculations. They had proven they understood the physics. The team could use their skills. The server said yes without hesitating. Of course they would help. This was their dream, working on a real space mission, even if just for a little while. When the video call ended, the server sat alone in the library study room. Everything was quiet. Through the window they could see the sun setting. Orange and pink light filled the sky. The same colors they had seen 3 days ago at the cafe when this all started. But everything was different now. The server closed their laptop slowly. They packed up their things. They walked out of the library into the evening air. And they smiled. A real, genuine smile. For the first time in years, they felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. The next morning, the server woke up early. For a moment, they wondered if yesterday had been a dream. But their laptop was still on the desk with the video conference program open. It had been real. NASA had called. They had been right about the mistake. And now they were going to help fix it. The server got ready for work, moving faster than usual. They felt energy they hadn't felt in months, maybe years. At the cafe, they arrived 15 minutes early. Their manager was surprised to see them so cheerful after yesterday's emergency. The server apologized for leaving early. They said everything was fine now. Better than fine, actually. But they didn't explain more. How could they? The manager would think they were making up stories if they said they were working with NASA. The server tied on their apron and started preparing the espresso machine for the morning rush. During their first break, the server checked their email. Dr. Chen had sent a message overnight. It contained documents about the Mars mission, technical papers about the spacecraft design, original calculations for the trajectory, data about Venus's orbit and gravitational field. Dr. Chen asked if the server could review these materials and join another video call tomorrow. She also asked an important question. Would the server be able to take time off from their cafe job? The trajectory work would require several hours each day for the next 2 weeks. The server stared at the email. Take time off? They needed this job. Rent was due in 2 weeks. They had bills to pay. They helped their family with money sometimes. Missing 2 weeks of work meant losing 2 weeks of pay. But this was NASA. This was a chance to work on a real Mars mission. When would this opportunity ever come again? The server made a decision. They would talk to their manager. Maybe they could work partial shifts or take unpaid leave. There had to be a way. That afternoon, during the slow period after lunch, the server approached their manager. They said they needed to ask about something important. The manager looked up from counting receipts. The server took a deep breath and explained. Not everything, but enough. They had discovered a mistake in a NASA mission. NASA wanted their help to fix it. They needed time off for 2 weeks. They knew it was sudden. They knew it was inconvenient. But this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. The manager stared at them. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the manager started laughing. Not mean laughing. Surprised laughing. They said this was the most unusual request they had ever received. NASA, really? The server pulled out their phone and showed the emails from Dr. Chen, the official NASA email address, the technical documents. The manager stopped laughing. Their eyes went wide. This was real. After another moment, the manager said yes. Take the 2 weeks. The cafe would manage. This was too important to miss. The server felt relief flood through them. They thanked their manager 3 times. That evening, they emailed Dr. Chen and said they could commit to the work. Full-time, whatever was needed. Dr. Chen responded within an hour. Excellent news. She would set up daily video calls with the trajectory team. She also said NASA would provide a small consulting fee for the server's time. It wouldn't be much, but it would help cover the lost wages from the cafe. The server read that sentence twice. NASA was going to pay them to do science, to work on space missions. They felt like they might cry. The next 2 weeks became the most intense time of the server's life. Every morning they woke up early and made coffee at home instead of at work. They set up their laptop on the small desk in their bedroom. At 8 o'clock, they joined the video call with NASA. The same team of engineers and scientists appeared on screen. They discussed calculations. They reviewed data. They ran computer simulations. The server's job was to double-check all the math, to look for errors, to verify that every number was correct. At first, the work was overwhelming. The other people on the calls had advanced degrees. They used technical language. They referenced things the server had never heard of. But Dr. Chen was patient. She explained concepts when needed. She made sure everyone spoke clearly. And slowly, the server began to understand more. They asked questions when confused. They shared their own ideas about the calculations. The other team members started to respect their input. The young person who worked at a cafe had sharp analytical skills. The days blurred together. Video calls in the morning. Lunch breaks where the server ate sandwiches while reading technical papers. More calls in the afternoon. Evenings spent reviewing calculations and preparing for the next day. Their roommates barely saw them. When asked what they were doing, the server just said they were working on a project. They didn't want to explain until everything was finished. It still felt unreal, like it might disappear if they talked about it too much. 1 week into the work, a problem appeared. The team had fixed the original error in the Venus gravitational assist. But now the new trajectory had a different issue. The spacecraft would arrive at Mars at the wrong time. The angle of approach would be off by a few degrees. This would affect the orbit insertion. The spacecraft might not be able to slow down enough to be captured by Mars's gravity. It could bounce off and fly away into space. Everyone on the video call looked worried. They had fixed one problem only to create another. The server listened to the discussion. Engineers suggested different solutions. Each solution had drawbacks. Changing the launch date would cost money and time. Changing the spacecraft's speed would require more fuel than they had. Changing the arrival angle would require a completely different trajectory. For 2 hours, the team debated. Nothing seemed to work. Dr. Chen called for a break. She said everyone should think about the problem overnight. They would meet again tomorrow with fresh ideas. That night, the server couldn't sleep. Again. They lay in bed, thinking about trajectories and orbits. Their mind worked through the numbers. There had to be a solution, something they were missing. At 2 in the morning, they got up and turned on the desk lamp. They pulled out paper and started drawing. Orbits, angles, velocity curves. They calculated and recalculated. Hours passed. Dawn light started coming through the window. And suddenly the server saw it. A solution. It was complicated, required precise timing, but it would work. At 8 o'clock, the server joined the video call. They looked exhausted. Dr. Chen asked if they were feeling okay. The server said they were fine. They had an idea. Could they share their screen? Dr. Chen said yes. The server pulled up the work they had done overnight. Pages of calculations, diagrams showing a new trajectory path. They explained their idea. Instead of changing the launch or the arrival, what if they added a small course correction midway through the flight? A tiny engine burn when the spacecraft was between Venus and Mars, just enough to adjust the angle without using much fuel. The engineers listened. They started nodding. One woman said this could work. Another man started doing calculations on his computer. The numbers checked out. The fuel requirements were within acceptable limits. The timing would be tight but possible. Dr. Chen smiled at the server. She said this was brilliant. Creative problem solving. Exactly what they needed. The team spent the rest of the day refining the idea. By evening, they had a complete plan. The Mars mission was saved. Again. And again, it was the cafe server who had found the answer. The second week of work was easier. The major problems were solved. Now it was just checking details, verifying calculations, making sure everything was perfect. The server fell into a comfortable rhythm with the team. They joked during breaks. They celebrated small successes. The server felt like part of something important, something bigger than themselves. On the last day, Dr. Chen thanked everyone for their hard work. She especially thanked the server. She said their contribution had been invaluable. Without them, the mission would have failed. The server felt proud, truly proud, for the first time in their life. After the final call ended, the server sat quietly. The 2 weeks were over. Tomorrow they would go back to the cafe, back to making lattes and cleaning tables, back to normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. They had worked with NASA. They had helped save a Mars mission. They had proven they belonged in the world of science, even without a fancy degree, even as someone who made coffee for a living. They had shown that passion and knowledge could come from anywhere. The server closed their laptop and smiled. Whatever came next, they had done something amazing. The server returned to work at the cafe on Monday morning. Everything looked the same. The espresso machine, the tables and chairs, the menu board on the wall. But the server felt different, changed. They tied on their apron and started making drinks for the morning customers. A man ordered a cappuccino. A woman wanted a latte with oat milk. Normal orders, normal day. Except the server kept thinking about trajectories and Mars and the team at NASA. Their manager asked how the 2 weeks went. The server said it went well, very well. They thanked their manager again for the time off. The manager smiled and said they were glad. Then more customers came in and there was no more time to talk. The cafe got busy. The server fell back into the familiar rhythm of work. Steam milk, pull espresso shots, wipe the counter, smile at customers, take money, give change, hour after hour. By the afternoon, they felt tired in a different way than before. This was physical tired, not mental tired like during the NASA work. 3 days passed. Work at the cafe, home to the apartment, sleep, work again. The server checked their email regularly. Dr. Chen had sent a thank you message at the end of the 2 weeks. She said the trajectory was finalized. The launch was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Everything was on track. The server wrote back saying they were happy to help. And that was that. Back to regular life. The server tried not to feel disappointed. They had known this would happen. The NASA work was temporary. Just 2 weeks. Now it was over. On Thursday morning, the server's phone rang while they were getting ready for work. An unknown number. They almost didn't answer. But something made them pick up. A man's voice asked if this was the person who had worked on the NASA Mars mission. The server said yes, confused. The man said he was a reporter from a science news website. He was writing a story about the Mars mission and had heard there was an error that was caught at the last minute. Someone at NASA had mentioned that a member of the public had spotted the mistake. Was that them? The server didn't know what to say. They asked how the reporter got their phone number. The reporter said it had been through some research and some contacts. He asked if they could do an interview. Just a few questions about how they found the error. The server said they needed to think about it. They weren't sure if NASA wanted this information to be public. The reporter said he understood. But this was an interesting story. The public would want to know. He asked the server to call him back if they decided to talk. Then he gave his number and hung up. The server stood in their small bedroom holding the phone. A reporter. A news story. They hadn't thought about this possibility. They immediately called Dr. Chen. It took a while to reach her. When she answered, the server explained about the reporter's call. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she said that NASA had been planning to make an announcement anyway. The error and the correction would be mentioned in their regular mission updates. It was part of being transparent about the science. If the server wanted to talk to reporters, that was their choice. NASA wouldn't stop them. But Dr. Chen warned them to be ready. Once the story came out, there might be a lot of media attention. That afternoon, the server called the reporter back. They did a phone interview during their break at work. They sat in the back room surrounded by boxes of coffee supplies. The reporter asked how they had spotted the mistake, what their background was, why they decided to contact NASA. The server answered honestly. They explained their love of space, their years of self-study, seeing the press conference on TV, working through the math at home, being scared to send the email. The reporter typed quickly, recording everything. He said this was a great story. It would go online tomorrow. He thanked the server and ended the call. The next morning, the server was making an espresso when their phone started buzzing with notifications. Text messages, emails, social media alerts. They stepped away from the machine and checked their phone. The Science News website had published the story. The headline read, "Café worker spots critical error in NASA Mars mission." The article described everything: the trajectory mistake, the server's email to NASA, the 2 weeks of work to fix it. The reporter had even included a photo, not of the server, but of the cafe where they worked. The small shop with its sign and windows visible in the picture. Within hours, the story spread. Bigger news websites picked it up. Then television news. Social media posts multiplied. People shared the article thousands of times. Everyone was talking about the cafe server who had saved a NASA mission. Some comments were positive. People called the server a genius. They said it was inspiring that someone without formal training could contribute to space science. They praised NASA for listening to the server's concerns. Other comments were skeptical. Some people didn't believe the story was real. They said it must be publicity for NASA. Others questioned whether someone who worked at a cafe could really understand rocket science better than trained engineers. By lunchtime, reporters started showing up at the cafe. A woman with a camera, a man with a microphone. They wanted interviews. They wanted photos. The cafe manager looked overwhelmed. Customers were confused. Why were news people at the coffee shop? The server felt panic rising. This was too much, too fast. They told their manager they needed to leave. They grabbed their backpack and walked out the back door. Reporters called after them, but the server kept walking. At home, the server's roommates were excited. They had seen the news. Why hadn't the server told them about working with NASA? This was amazing. The server explained they hadn't wanted to say anything until it was certain. Until the mission was successful. One roommate said the server was famous now. Look at all these articles. Look at social media. The server looked at their phone. Thousands of people were talking about them. Their name was everywhere. It felt surreal, overwhelming. They turned off their phone and went to their bedroom. They needed quiet, space to think. For 2 days, the server stayed home. They called in sick to work. They couldn't handle the reporters and attention. Their phone never stopped buzzing with messages. News organizations wanted interviews. Talk shows invited them to appear. Even some universities reached out saying they were interested in the server's story. The server felt confused. A week ago, they were just making coffee. Now suddenly everyone wanted to talk to them. They didn't know how to handle it. On Sunday, Dr. Chen called. She asked how the server was doing. The server admitted they felt overwhelmed. Dr. Chen said that was understandable. Media attention could be intense. She offered some advice. The server didn't have to respond to everyone. They could choose which interviews to do. They should only talk to reporters who seemed respectful and professional. And they should remember why this story mattered. Not for fame or attention, but because it showed that science welcomes input from everyone, that good ideas can come from unexpected places, that passion and self-education have value. The server felt better after talking to Dr. Chen. They decided to do one television interview. Just one, with a respected science journalist who had reached out. The interview would be recorded at the cafe. The server talked to their manager, who was excited. This would be good publicity for the shop. On Tuesday morning, a film crew arrived. They set up cameras and lights. Customers watched curiously. The journalist was kind. She asked thoughtful questions. The server relaxed and told their story. How they loved space since childhood. How they studied on their own. How they spotted the error and worked with NASA. The interview lasted 30 minutes. When it was done, the server felt relieved. They had shared their story. Now maybe the attention would calm down. The interview aired 2 days later. Millions of people watched it. The response was mostly positive. People were inspired by the server's dedication and courage. Parents told their children about the story. Teachers showed the interview in classrooms. The server became a symbol, proof that anyone can contribute to science if they work hard and never stop learning. The server received hundreds of emails from young people who loved space. They said the story made them believe they could work in science too. Even if they didn't have much money, even if college seemed impossible. The server read these emails and cried. Good tears. They realized their story mattered. Not just for them, but for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong in science. At the cafe, things slowly returned to normal. Fewer reporters showed up. The customers stopped staring. The server went back to making drinks and cleaning tables. But sometimes people recognized them. They would say, "You're the one who helped NASA." The server would smile and nod. Yes, they were, and it still felt amazing every time they thought about it. Their life had changed in unexpected ways. But the biggest change was inside. The server believed in themselves now. They knew they were smart, capable, worthy of being in the world of science, and no one could ever take that knowledge away. 2 weeks after the television interview, the server received an email that made their hearts skip. It was from NASA's Human Resources Department. The subject line said, "Employment Opportunity, Jet Propulsion Laboratory." The server opened it with shaking hands. The email said that based on their work on the Mars mission, JPL wanted to offer them an internship position, 6 months, paid, working with the trajectory team on future missions. The server read the email 3 times to make sure they understood correctly. There was more. NASA would help pay for the server to take online courses in aerospace engineering, classes from real universities, taught by professors. If the internship went well, there might be an opportunity for permanent employment. The email asked if the server would be interested. They needed to respond within 1 week. The server sat at their desk staring at the screen. This was everything they had ever dreamed of. A real job at NASA, a chance to study aerospace engineering, a path to a career in space science, but doubt crept in. They weren't qualified. They had no degree in engineering. Just self-taught knowledge and 2 weeks of helping fix one trajectory. What if they failed? What if they got to JPL and everyone realized they didn't belong there? What if they made mistakes and embarrassed themselves? The server closed their laptop and went for a walk. They needed to clear their head. Think carefully about this decision. Outside, the weather was perfect, sunny and warm. The server walked through their neighborhood, past familiar houses and stores. They thought about their life now. Working at the cafe, paying rent, helping family. It was stable, safe, predictable. Taking the NASA internship meant leaving all that, moving to Pasadena where JPL was located, finding a new apartment, starting over in a new place. It was scary, but the server remembered something Dr. Chen had said during one of their video calls. The biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. Science required courage, trying new things, taking chances even when the outcome was uncertain. The server made their decision. That evening they called their parents. They hadn't talked to them much about the NASA work. Their parents knew some of what happened from the news. But the server hadn't explained everything. Now they told them about the internship offer. Their parents were quiet at first. Then their mother spoke. She said she was proud, so proud. She had always known her child was smart, special. This was their chance. They should take it. Their father agreed. The family would manage without the server's financial help for a while. This opportunity was too important to miss. The next day, the server replied to the NASA email. Yes, they wanted the internship. They would be honored to work at JPL. The response came back quickly. Excellent, the internship would start in 1 month. That gave the server time to move and get settled. NASA sent more information, salary details, housing resources in Pasadena, paperwork to fill out. The server printed everything and made a folder. This was real. They were actually going to work at NASA. Telling their cafe manager was hard. The manager had been so supportive, giving them time off for the NASA work, dealing with the reporters. The server felt guilty about quitting, but the manager surprised them. When the server explained about the internship, the manager's face lit up. They said this was wonderful news. Of course the server should go. This was their dream. The cafe would be fine. They hugged. The server promised to visit whenever they came back to town. The manager said they better, and they wanted photos of the server at NASA. The server's roommates helped them pack. It didn't take long. They didn't own much. Clothes, books, the old notebooks filled with space calculations, their laptop. Everything fit in 3 large boxes and 2 suitcases. The roommates threw a small goodbye party. Pizza and cheap wine. They toasted the server's success. One roommate joked that soon the server would be famous, too important to remember them. The server laughed and said never. These were the people who had supported them. Let them complain about bad days at work, shared rent and food when money was tight. Real friends. The drive to Pasadena took 5 hours. The server had sold their old car months ago to save money. so they took a bus. The boxes had been shipped ahead. The bus rolled down the highway through dry California landscape. The server watched out the window, feeling nervous excitement. A new city, a new job, a completely new life. When the bus pulled into Pasadena's station, the sun was setting. The sky was orange and purple. The server grabbed their suitcases and found a taxi to take them to their new apartment. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, tiny kitchen, but it was theirs. The boxes had arrived. The server spent the evening unpacking, hanging clothes in the closet, putting books on shelves, setting up their desk by the window. From the window, they could see mountains in the distance. Somewhere beyond those mountains was JPL, their new workplace. The server felt a mix of fear and excitement. Tomorrow they would go there for the first time, meet their new colleagues, start their internship. Everything was about to change. The first day at JPL was overwhelming. Security at the gate, ID badge, orientation meetings, tour of the facilities. The server saw control rooms where missions were managed, clean rooms where spacecraft were built, laboratories filled with equipment they didn't recognize. Everyone was friendly, but everyone also seemed so smart, so educated. The server felt small again, out of place, a cafe worker surrounded by scientists and engineers. Then they met their team. Dr. Chen welcomed them warmly. She introduced them to 5 other people, 2 engineers, 2 scientists, 1 other intern who was a college student studying physics. They would all work together on trajectory calculations for several upcoming missions, not just Mars, but also missions to asteroids, to Jupiter's moons, to Saturn. The server's job would be to verify calculations and help with computer simulations. Dr. Chen said they had proven they had the skills. Now they just needed to learn the tools and processes. The first week was hard. So much to learn. Software programs for orbital mechanics, computer systems for running simulations, technical documents written in language the server barely understood. They stayed late every night trying to catch up, trying to understand. The other intern was helpful. He explained things patiently. He said everyone feels lost at first. It gets easier. The server wanted to believe him. But at night, alone in their small apartment, they felt doubt. Maybe they had made a mistake. Maybe they weren't good enough for this. The second week was better. Things started making sense. The server learned how to use the simulation software. They ran their first calculation and got the right answer. Dr. Chen praised their work, said they were doing well, learning fast. The server felt a little more confident. By the third week, they felt comfortable. They understood the team's processes. They contributed ideas during meetings. They helped solve problems. The other team members treated them with respect. Not as the cafe worker who got lucky, but as a colleague, someone who belonged. 1 month into the internship, the team faced a challenge. A mission to an asteroid needed a trajectory adjustment. The asteroid's orbit had been slightly different than predicted. The spacecraft needed to change course, but the fuel was limited. The adjustment had to be precise. The team worked for days on calculations, testing different options. Nothing seemed quite right. During a meeting, the server had an idea. What if they used the asteroid's own rotation to help? Time the approach so the spacecraft could use the asteroid's gravity in a specific way. Save fuel. Still reach the target. The team considered the idea. They ran simulations. The numbers worked. The adjustment would succeed, and it would use less fuel than any other option they had considered. Dr. Chen looked at the server with pride. This was creative thinking, exactly what NASA needed. The server felt that familiar feeling, the same one from when they had solved the Mars trajectory problem. They belonged here. They could do this work. They were good at it. After the meeting, Dr. Chen asked to speak with the server privately. They went to her office. Dr. Chen said the server's internship was going very well, better than expected. She wanted to discuss the future. The internship was supposed to last 6 months. But what if there was an opportunity for permanent employment? Would the server be interested? The server felt joy rush through them. Yes, absolutely yes, Dr. Chen smiled. She said she would talk to management, start the process. But she was confident. The server had proven themselves. They had earned a place at NASA. Walking out of JPL that evening, the server looked up at the sky. Stars were starting to appear. Small points of light in the darkening blue. Somewhere up there, spacecraft were traveling to other worlds. missions that the server was helping to plan, work that they were part of. The server thought about their journey, from watching space documentaries as a child, to studying alone in their bedroom, to working at a cafe, to spotting a mistake on TV, to this moment, standing outside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, as an employee, as a scientist, as someone who had found their place in the universe. The server smiled and walked to their car. Tomorrow they would come back, and the day after, and the day after that. This was their life now, and it was better than they had ever imagined. 6 months passed quickly. The server's internship became a permanent job. They now had the title of trajectory analyst. It still felt strange to see that on their ID badge, but it was real. They had an office, a desk, a computer with access to NASA's systems. They worked on multiple missions, calculated orbits, ran simulations, checked other people's math. Every day was different. Every day was exciting. The server had found their calling, but one mission remained special. The Mars mission. The one where everything had started. The spacecraft had launched successfully 3 months after the trajectory was fixed. No problems. Perfect launch. Since then, it had been traveling through space for 9 months, getting closer to Mars every day. The landing was scheduled for next week. The entire team at JPL was preparing. This was a critical moment. Years of work. Millions of dollars. All depending on a few minutes of precise maneuvering. The server had been invited to mission control for the landing. Not as a visitor. As part of the team, they would monitor the trajectory during the final approach, make sure everything stayed on course. Dr. Chen said their presence was important. They had helped save this mission. They deserved to see it succeed. The server felt honored and nervous. What if something went wrong? What if there was another error they hadn't caught? Dr. Chen told them not to worry. The trajectory had been checked and rechecked dozens of times. Everything would be fine. The week before landing, the server barely slept. They reviewed calculations constantly, ran simulations at night in their apartment, made sure every number was perfect. Their co-workers told them to relax, but the server couldn't. This mission meant too much. It represented their entire journey. From cafe worker to NASA analyst, from outsider to insider. If this mission failed, it would feel like a personal failure. Even though they knew that was irrational, space missions were complex. Many things could go wrong that had nothing to do with trajectory. 3 days before landing, the entire trajectory team met. Dr. Chen reviewed the final plan. The spacecraft would enter Mars's atmosphere at exactly the right angle. Too steep and it would burn up. Too shallow and it would bounce off into space. The heat shield would protect it during entry. Then parachutes would deploy. Finally, rockets would fire to slow the landing. The whole process would take 7 minutes. 7 minutes of terror, as some engineers called it. Communication with Earth took 14 minutes. By the time they received signals, everything would already be decided. Success or failure would have already happened. The day before landing, the server went to mission control early. They wanted to see the room empty, quiet. They walked between the rows of computer stations, looked at the large screens on the walls that would show data during landing. Imagine tomorrow. The tension, the waiting, the hope. An older engineer found them there. He introduced himself, said he had heard the server's story. He told them about his own journey to NASA. He had grown up poor. His parents didn't finish high school, but he loved science. He worked hard, got scholarships, eventually made it to JPL. He said NASA was full of people like them. People who didn't have easy paths, who fought for their dreams, who proved that passion mattered more than privilege. The server thanked him. They didn't feel so alone anymore. Landing day arrived. The server woke at 4 in the morning, too excited to sleep. They dressed carefully. Professional clothes. Their NASA badge. They ate breakfast but tasted nothing. Their hands shook slightly as they drove to JPL. The parking lot was already full. Media trucks lined the street. Reporters set up cameras. This landing would be broadcast live. People around the world would watch. The server showed their badge at security and went inside. Mission control was busy. Engineers checking systems. Scientists reviewing data. Everyone preparing. Dr. Chen found the server and brought them to their station. A computer showing the spacecraft's trajectory. Real-time data from space. The server's job was to monitor this data, watch for any unexpected changes, alert the team if something looked wrong. Dr. Chen squeezed their shoulder. She said they would do great. The server nodded, not trusting their voice. They sat down and logged into the system. On the screens, the spacecraft appeared as a small dot moving toward Mars. 9 months of travel. Coming down to these final hours, the room filled with people, engineers, scientists, directors, even some astronauts came to watch. Everyone found their stations. The server looked around at all these brilliant people, and they were one of them now. Part of this team, part of this moment. The public viewing room next door was packed with media and guests. The server's parents were there. They had flown in to watch. The cafe manager was there too, and the server's old roommates, all the people who had supported them, who had believed in them when this seemed impossible. The final hour began. The spacecraft was approaching Mars's atmosphere. Commands had been sent hours ago. Now it was on its own, following its programmed instructions. The room went quiet. People stopped talking, all eyes on the screens. The server watched their monitor. The trajectory looked perfect, exactly as calculated, exactly as they had helped fix months ago. Their heart pounded. This was it, everything they had worked for. Coming down to these moments, entry into the atmosphere began. The spacecraft started shaking from friction. Heat built up on the shield. Temperatures reached thousands of degrees, but the shield held. The server saw data showing the spacecraft's speed. It was slowing down. Good. The angle was right. Still on target. Around the room, people started breathing again. First major milestone passed. The spacecraft was entering Mars's atmosphere successfully. Not burning up. Not bouncing off. The trajectory was working. Parachutes deployed. The server saw confirmation on the screen. The spacecraft was still falling, but much slower now. More data came in. Position, speed, altitude, everything perfect. The server felt tears in their eyes. They blinked them away, not yet. The mission wasn't complete. The hardest part was coming. The final descent. When rockets had to fire at exactly the right moment to slow the landing. Too early and the spacecraft would run out of fuel and crash. Too late and it would hit the ground too fast and be destroyed. The altitude dropped. 5 kilometers. 4. 3. The room was completely silent. 2 kilometers. 1. The server held their breath. Then confirmation. Rockets firing. The spacecraft was slowing. Slowing. The numbers on the screen decreased. 500 meters. 200. 100. 50. 20. 10. And then, a signal. Touchdown. The spacecraft had landed. On Mars. Safely. Successfully. After 9 months in space. After all the calculations and corrections and worry. It had made it. The room exploded with cheers. People hugged. Some cried. Others jumped up and down. The public viewing room erupted in applause. The server sat at their station, tears running down their face. They had done it. The team had done it. The mission was successful. Dr. Chen came over and hugged them tight. She said they should be proud, so proud. Without them, this moment would never have happened. The spacecraft would have missed Mars. All this joy would be grief instead. The server hugged her back, unable to speak. Too overwhelmed with emotion. Photos came in from Mars. The first images from the surface. Red dirt, rocks, a pink sky. The spacecraft's cameras working perfectly. Soon it would start its scientific work, studying the atmosphere, analyzing soil samples, searching for signs of ancient water. All the research they had planned. The server looked at the images and felt awe. They had helped put this spacecraft on another planet. Their calculations, their work, had contributed to this moment. A café server who loved space, who studied at home, who spotted a mistake on TV, had helped humanity reach Mars. That evening, NASA held a celebration. Food, drinks, speeches. The director thanked the entire team. Then he specifically mentioned the server, told their story to everyone present, how they had caught the trajectory error, saved the mission, joined NASA and proved themselves as a talented analyst. Everyone applauded. The server stood and waved, embarrassed but happy. After the speeches, their parents found them, hugged them, said they were so proud. Their father had tears in his eyes. Their mother kept saying she always knew their child was special, destined for great things. The cafe manager gave the server a gift, a framed photo of the cafe, the place where it all started, where they had seen the press conference on TV, where the dream began. The manager said this photo should remind the server of their journey, that big achievements often start in small places, with small observations, with the courage to speak up. The server thanked them and promised to hang it in their office, a reminder of where they came from and how far they had traveled. Late that night, the server drove home. The streets were quiet. They thought about everything that had happened. 1 year ago, they were making lattes and wondering if life would ever change. Now they worked at NASA. They had helped land a spacecraft on Mars. They had proven that anyone could contribute to science. That education didn't only happen in classrooms. That passion and dedication could overcome obstacles. The server parked their car and looked up at the night sky. Mars was visible, a small red dot among the stars. But now it wasn't just a dot. It was a place they had touched, a world they had helped humanity reach.